Hello, everybody. My name is Lisa Lamont, and I am your host of Ladies Get Your Prance On. And today we have a very, very, very special guest in the house. His name is Dr. Srini Pillay, and he is a Harvard psychiatrist. And he is also the founder and CEO of the Neuro Business Group. And Srini, welcome to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me, Lisa. I'm really happy to be here and interested to take your questions.
One of the demographic of my show is mostly women entrepreneurs, and they're in business. And a lot of women, they get going really, really fast, and they get going excited for the first year. They go to networking events and they work with all these coaches. But I've been in business for 8 years myself, and I see so many people giving up and falling away. And it's a little bit about mindset. And so if you could just kind of start the show off and address that, I would love that.
Sure. So I think a lot of research points to the fact that it's not just your basic capabilities, but the way in which you use your mind that will determine whether you're successful or not. So Carol Dweck has done a lot of great research pointing to the fact that having a growth mindset is one of the major determinants of success. So what I would say to people is reflect on that for a second and ask yourself, do I believe that my life can change? And do I believe that I can take my life to the next level? As soon as you have that belief, you start to prepare your mind for the kind of success that you want to achieve. Now, step number one here from my perspective is what I call possibility thinking. And again, the first question I would ask people is, do you want to have an exceptional life? And most people say, of course. And I say, well, by definition, an exception means that it's low probability. It's not the middle of the bell curve, which is great. That's what we want it to be. And once we have that, we want to steer our way forward, often with belief, which is possibility thinking. Now, when people say, well, I can't just believe in the future. I come home tired every day. I'm not seeing the profits I want to see. I'm pulling my hair out. I don't quite know how to get there. What I will say is that science teaches us that when you believe in something, it activates the reward pathways in the brain because dopamine increases. Yeah. And it also decreases your stress. So as a result of this, your chemistry changes and your motivation increases. And because your motivation increases on a day-to-day basis, I would request that people consider resetting their minds or resetting their brains really from time to time during the day. And so one of the reasons I wrote the book, Tinker Dabble Doodle Try, is that I wanted to...
Gotta give a plug. I love this book.
Thank you. I wanted people to recognize that for most of the time when we structure our days, we go focus, 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 fatigue. And by the end of the day, we're done. And the reason for that is that we're not recharging our brains during those major periods when there are slumps. So, sometimes mid-morning you get really tired. After lunch you get tired. I take a little piece called How to Be Productive in a Food Coma, which relates to this. And the third is in the middle of the day and then at the end of the day. Well, if we learn, instead of just going focus, 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 fatigue, if we did focus, and that book is about how to unfocus intelligently, and then focus, you're always optimizing your brain so that you're making better decisions, you're being more creative, and you're being more productive without stressing your brain out. And so I think that's a great place for us to start, to say to people that, resetting to belief is what will change your brain's chemistry. But as you and I have talked about before, it needs to be authentic. And belief doesn't mean it has to be some completely crazy idea about what to do. Belief simply means I have the capacity to change and learn as I'm building my business. And I have the capacity to make more money. And there are plenty of people just like me, no matter what your level of education, no matter what you think you're selling, if you are passionate about what you're doing, you will continue to learn and refine your business so that you can get to your goal.
I love it. One of the questions I wanted to ask you, because one of the techniques I teach is called mirror love. And that is doing affirmations each morning in front of the mirror and asking what you want to bring in for today. And when I asked you that question when I met you at Secret Knock last month in May, which was a great event, by the way, thank you, Greg Reed, was I asked, is that affirmation attainable? And if you could answer that question, because I thought that answer was just really brilliant.
Yeah, so I think research shows that positive affirmations can really help us get the confidence that we need just to really start the day on the right foot. However, it's really important that that affirmation feel authentic, because if it doesn't feel authentic, then looking in the mirror, what's going to mirror back to you is lack of authenticity and stress. And so I always say to people, if your affirmation is that you are grateful for A, B, or C, then be grateful for that. If your affirmation is, I can make $1 million, and you believe that, that's fantastic. But if it's too much, you can break that down until you get an amount. And if you say, I can make $200,000 this year and increase that slowly over time, just that affirmation can actually be helpful to you. So I think that from my practice, what I've noticed is that if people are authentic, and authentic doesn't mean you have to be positive the whole day. It's hard to be positive the whole day. It's sort of like straining to be positive is one of the most harmful things to us. It's also true, though, that just giving into the negativity is also harmful. So what I think we need to do when our emotions get the better of us is to first try to be mindful. Rather than identify with the emotions, just look at them. Notice what your brain is doing. And I used to run the anxiety disorder service at Harvard, and I would say to people who would come in incredibly anxious and not know how to deal with their anxiety, and they would leave by learning how to do self-talk and learning how to change their brain blood flow so that they could get to their goal. So, for example, when you're anxious, and you're incredibly anxious and you're trying to do an affirmation, but you can't do the affirmation, you don't know what to do, what you can do is realize, firstly, you have the power to change your own brain blood flow, that many, many studies have shown that this is possible, and that you can do this by using self-talk. So let's talk about self-talk first, right? So essentially, when we talk to ourselves, we are actually able to change brain blood flow, but we need to remember that there are a few principles behind this that make it easier to succeed. The first is when you have an emotion, label it. This is called affect labeling. And what it tells us is that if you're anxious and you say, I'm really feeling freaked out right now, or I'm really feeling angry right now, labeling that emotion drives blood away from the anxiety center in the brain back to the thinking brain. So the anxiety center, which also processes other emotions, is called the amygdala. And there's a lot of excessive blood flow in that area when we're anxious. And so if we want to really drain some of that blood away, labeling the emotion is the first thing. The second thing relates to a process that's called ironic process theory. And there's a person named Daniel Wegner who actually studied this particular process. And all it means is that when you say you do not want to do something, under stress, your brain will do the exact opposite of what you want. So classic example, you're at a party and you're holding these glasses of wine, and red wine, and you're walking past a white couch and you're saying, do not drop the wine. Why is it that often at times like that, that's exactly when you'll trip over something, and that's exactly when you'll drop the wine. And so what Daniel Wegner found was that under stress, the brain doesn't have enough energy to distribute to getting your goal and then trying not to make something happen. So effectively, it doesn't hear the word not. And so your brain hears drop the wine and says, oh, drop the wine, here goes the wine. This has been shown in a number of other situations as well. So for example, in soccer players, if you put eye tracking devices on the soccer players and you ask them to score penalties, if they say, do not kick the ball to the right, the eye goes to the right immediately. Also with office romances, people say, I must not fall in love with that person. The next thing you know, they're head over heels in love with each other. So the second principle is when you're using self-talk, avoid using the word not. Rather, say what you want to do and what you want to achieve. So for example, people might go into a board meeting and will say, I do not want to lose my temper. But the moment you say that, you're putting yourself at risk of losing your temper. The third principle is something that was studied by Ethan Kross and his colleagues, which essentially says that when you talk to yourself, talk to yourself in the second person and call yourself by name. So Serena Williams, for example, when she's playing tennis and she goes back to the baseline, she says, come on, Serena, you're going to crush this. And it's when you say, when you call yourself by your name and you say you create a distance as if you're talking to yourself. Instead of saying I'm going to crush this, you want to say you're going to crush this. And when you say you're going to crush this, then that actually helps to facilitate. Your brain is able to process that to decrease anxiety and stress so that you can get to your goals. Now, we know that when we're anxious, the amygdala, the anxiety center, has this excessive brain blood flow to it. So I've created a simple 5-step process to help people learn how to take blood away from the anxiety brain and put it back in the thinking brain. So let's say you're in the morning and you're going crazy because you're not on time and you can't get your hair done and you're thinking, I look terrible and I don't like my outfit. So already you're in a tiz. And you step out the door and you step into a puddle and you try to figure out, just think of the worst possible day. Or even if it's not that bad, you're fine. You get to work, you open your email box and suddenly you see one after the other negative email or demanding email, or things that just, too much. The moment you start to get overwhelmed in this way, recognize that there are ways in which you can actually decrease anxiety by changing your brain blood flow. So the mnemonic, and I'd love people to take out a piece of paper and write this down right now, is CIRCA. It's CIRCA. And I'll tell you what each thing stands for. And if you could write this down and then practice this regularly, you'll find each of these is a technique that's based on a lot of brain science that shows us that it can be effective. So the first is chunking, which means you have a big problem ahead of you and you're thinking, how am I going to solve this problem? Break it down into smaller parts, or give yourself a realistic idea of what time intervals are going to be needed to solve this problem. So let's say somebody puts a project on your desk and says, I need this by tomorrow. You're like, there's no way I'm going to get this done by tomorrow. Well, that's your first response. If you're going to get it done by tomorrow, figure out in what time intervals you're going to get that done. And the moment you start to become a little bit more rational with yourself around that, your brain starts to calm down. The second is I for ignore mental chatter. And what that means is simply mindfulness. And of all the techniques, this probably has the most research backing it up. In fact, mindfulness can even change your genes so that you become less anxious. So when you ignore mental chatter, what you do is you close your eyes and you imagine that your attention is like a flashlight. And you place this flashlight on your breath. You just notice yourself breathing in and out. And that simple technique, ignoring the chatter, will actually drive blood away from the anxiety center back to the thinking brain. Now, in fact, when you think about this, a lot of people will say, yes, but my mind always goes back to the negative thought. That's fine. You just gently bring it back. Then the R is for reality check. And reality check in simple terms is this too shall pass. You know how when you get bad news, you're having a really bad day, one of the things to say to yourself is, this is going to go away. Because most of the time it does. And so when you say that to yourself and you provide that reassurance, then you are far less anxious. The next C is control check, which is like the serenity prayer, which is I'll control the things I can, and I need to have the wisdom to know the difference between that and the things I can't control. Like every day people are in a tiz about politics, about the weather, about things that you're not going to do anything to control. So why do you have to be fixated on that? Rather, think of the things you can control. So to everyone, I would say, think of one thing you're trying to over-control right now. And it may even be yourself. Something you're trying to over-control, write it down on a piece of paper, put it in a bottle, and then go to the ocean if you have one accessible, or to a river or to a stream, and throw it away. And that act will actually help you give in to things that you don't have to control. And then the last step is the A for attention shift, which is that on a day-to-day basis, our minds are immersed in the problems. Every problem that comes your way, every email that comes your way, every call that comes your way. Well, spend some time in your day taking your attention and putting it back on the solution. Because it's when it's on the solution that this will matter. Now, I want to stop to ask if you have any other questions, but there's much more to say about this. I just want people to remember that you can practice this CIRCA, C-I-R-C-A, chunking, ignore mental chatter, reality check, control check, and attention shift. You can practice this whenever you're angry or 5 minutes before you go into a situation where you're going to get anxious.
I love that. That is great. And you kind of covered my questions that I had to ask you. One of the questions that I wrote down that you talked about in another show that I heard you on is to explain the real genius inside of you. I love that.
Well, I really believe that one of the most ignored sources of energy is human intelligence. And I really believe that we get distracted by our schooling, because the schooling sets up a system whereby you assess your intelligence relative to the highest levels of schools. Now, there have been plenty of successful entrepreneurs and plenty of successful women who have not necessarily had that education, but they have turned to their ingenuity, and they have activated their own ingenuity to help their businesses thrive. So you might say, well, what's this ingenuity and how do I access it and how do I build it into my day? Well, before that, let me just give you an example so you know what I mean. There's a project called One Laptop for All, which has had some success and some failures. But the one thing that was interesting about it was they took a bunch of laptops and they dropped it in Ethiopia. And the question was, what will the kids do? They've never seen any technology before. Now imagine you've never seen technology and somebody comes and puts this material in front of you. They thought, will they break them, sit on them, play with them? Well, within a couple of minutes, they found the on-off button. A few minutes later, they learned how to sing ABC songs. And then within that week, they had hacked Android. These are kids with no formal education. And I once did a coaching workshop, so I work with corporations as well. And I asked them, I said to people, I've got this new technology. I'm going to give you a half hour, play around with it and see what you find out. Everybody wanted an instruction manual. In life, the real instruction manual is in yourself. And just as these kids who had never seen technology before were able to discover it, we need to put ourselves in discovery mode to access our ingenuity. Now, ingenuity is essentially, in brain terms, having the requisite number of self-circuits activated in your brain. So who you are is represented by a number of different circuits in the brain. And one of the things that we want to do is turn these on so that throughout the day we're operating with our maximum light, metaphorically.
Yep.
So if you ask, well, how do you turn this light on? My new book is really all about the fact that I think we've been misled. Now, focus is extremely important, and I have no doubt that it's important. But unfocus is what will allow your brain to focus much better. And if you build these unfocused periods into your day, into all of these slump periods, you are much more likely to get to your goal. Now, if you ask, well, how do I do this? Like, what do I do if at 10 o'clock I'm falling asleep? Or in the middle of the afternoon, I'm like, oh my God, I need another cup of coffee. What do I do? Well, you can get the cup of coffee if you want it, although studies have shown that napping can actually be superior to that cup of coffee. So if you don't have a lot of time, 10 minutes of napping improves clarity. 90 minutes of napping improves creativity. So if you've got a creative project, you may feel like you're wasting time to nap for 90 minutes. But if you're working with this tired brain, it doesn't really work because you're not going to be using your ingenuity. For your ingenuity to come forth, you want the fullness of who you are to be expressed. Other things you can do, like daydreaming. People would say, daydreaming? Like, how is that helpful? Well, there are certain kinds of daydreaming that do not work. So slipping into a daydream is like falling off a cliff. You want to actually find the mental parachute so that if you jump off, you're jumping off safely. And studies have also shown that guilty, dysphoric daydreaming, where you're just ruminating, maybe over having too many drinks the night before, maybe you're a little too loud, and you're not sure what you felt. Well, the next morning you get up and like, oh my God, what did I do last night? Daydreaming like that doesn't help either. But there is a type of daydreaming called positive constructive daydreaming, where you can set aside 15 minutes of your day, and during those 15 minutes, you have playful or wishful imagery. Imagine lying on a beach, lying on a yacht, running with your dogs into the woods. The moment you start having this imagery, you do this while you are doing something low-key. Could be walking, you could be knitting, could be gardening. You should not be doing nothing. So studies have shown that it's much more effective if you're doing something low-key. And what your brain does is it actually gets you back on board and connects you with yourself. So You may ask, well, how does this happen in the brain? Like, what does this mean? Well, when you are focused, your brain operates like a fork. It picks up only those parts of your attention that are built like your LinkedIn profile. So it's like, this is who I am. What's my gender? It's my age. This is where I work. It misses out the complexity of who you are. And all studies have shown that one of the biggest correlates of burnout is lack of engagement. And lack of engagement comes from not having the maximum parts of yourself present in your work on any given day. Now, if you have just this fork of focus, you only have the concrete elements of who you are. And there are many things that are hard to understand that still need to be present in our days to fully express who we are. And so when you unfocus with napping, with positive constructive daydreaming, with even doodling, which improves memory by 29%, since we spend 46.9% of our days daydreaming anyway, why wouldn't we want to learn how to intelligently unfocus? Because when we unfocus, the brain metaphorically invites other silverware to the table. So it says, hey, instead of just the fork, I want a spoon. So the neurons have to act like spoons, and they scoop up the delicious melange of flavors of your identity, like the scent of your grandmother or the smell of pie on a crisp fall day. These things may have nothing to do with work, but because they're part of your life and your experience, you feel much more whole. They also invite chopsticks, which connect ideas about yourself and make you feel more whole, because maybe you're a soft-spoken person who's very strong. You don't have to be soft or strong. You can be both. And we are all filled with these kinds of contradictions. And so when you get the chopsticks in unfocus will connect all these parts of you that previously were not connected. And then depending on your diet, you get a marrow spoon or a melon spoon that gets into all the nooks and crannies of your brain and picks up little bits and pieces of information and memory. So all of a sudden, your identity goes from being a fork-based identity to actually being an identity where you have a fork, a spoon, chopsticks, and a marrow spoon. And all of a sudden, much more of you is expressed, and you have a much greater chance of accessing that ingenuity. I also say to people, I think it's really important. In fact, Dr. Oz's magazine, The Good Life, just featured this about that book, about Tinker, this month. Because they pointed out that in Tinker, I point out that you don't have to stick to one thing all the time. That's not what makes you smarter. Einstein dabbled in music. Picasso dabbled in the mathematics of Poincaré to make his greatest discoveries. And what studies show is that when we have a hobby or we have something else, as long as we think about how the hobby is teaching us about our primary profession, then we actually can learn much more from it from a different angle. So it's a little bit like when I play tennis, for example. I'm not a great player, but I love playing, and I think, when should I be offensive? When should I be defensive? When should I reset my mind? And the beauty about all of these things is that it's within the reach of every person. Every one of us can do this if we apply ourselves to this. And so I implore everyone who's listening to remember that no matter what your grades are, no matter what your GPA is, whether you went to school or not, there are plenty of people who haven't even finished high school who have applied themselves because of their ingenuity to their professions. And I would say that the power resides within you. And no matter what negativity you find outside of yourself, create a field of awareness that you can always expand into, a field of possibility, so that the negativity can do whatever it's doing. But you want to expand into this field of possibility. And I truly believe that it's tinkering, dabbling, doodling, and trying that will give our brains a chance to re-energize so that we can believe again. Because I think for the most part, we've become so fatigued with the way we run our lives that there's no time to believe. And as you said, I think one of the things I love that you said before we started this interview was that there are parts of the mind that we can't explain, and there are parts of the mind that we can't access through regular or linear ways. And sometimes there's a sense of intuition that we need to activate to steer ourselves forward. And I strongly believe in the sense there actually is a science behind it, but you don't need to always be justifying everything. I think fundamentally, you need to be able to release yourself to the power of who you are.
Absolutely. It's so important. One of the things that I've learned since reading your book, and I'm going to share the link to the show, the Tinker Dabble Doodle is a lot of women are into journaling, right? That's like the big thing for women, focus on journaling. Every morning, get up, write 3 pages. And so when I talk to people, everyone gets excited when something new comes out. They want to try it. This will keep me on track or doing a to-do list. And so now I've been sharing, since I've been reading your book, I go, instead of journaling and writing down thoughts and ideas, why don't you just doodle? Why don't you just, I like to play with my name, Lisa Lamont, and I like to write in 3D. Right. And that just opens up all this creativity. I've been telling my friends, that I go, instead of journaling, why don't you just doodle? And they're like, it's like, I have permission to doodle. It's just like, we get so focused, Dr.
Yes.
We get so focused. What can you say to women who, I'm 58 years old, and a lot of people say, I'm too, a dog's too old to learn new tricks. And so what can you say to the women over 40 that think that they can't do over, they can't start a new business or write a book at, being older? A lot of women have just given up. What can you say to them on that?
I would say as soon as you start to feel like something is impossible, it's due to one of several things. In fact, I have an index called the Possibility Index that measures your sense of possibility on your site. And what it tells you is that if your sense of possibility is low, it's either because your brain is so drained that it's just not wired to even think about that, or you're stuck in some kind of habit of thinking. And stress actually makes you go to habit pathways. If you're stressed out, your brain's just not going to be able to think forward. Some people can't imagine. Some people are depressed or anxious. Some people are lost. So impossibility is simply that your brain has gotten stuck due to one of these different causes. Yeah. And what I would say to them is that Google, just Google people who started their businesses after 50. And you will find a significant number of people who've done that. Colonel Sanders of KFC, actually, I think started his business at around 50. And so if you're feeling like it can't be done, don't recognize and acknowledge and respect that your brain is probably too fried to actually believe that something is possible, and recognize that the facts show that it is possible. And in life, you don't want to just look for the mode, as I'm suggesting. You also want to look for the exceptions, because I'm sure some people will say, yes, but I've got to look after my kids, and I've got to cook when I come home, and I'm a single mother, or my husband's not helpful, or I'm disenfranchised in society and people don't accept me for who I am. It's all real. But one of the strongest things I feel is that when we are feeling weakened by something, the studies actually show that we're not strengthened by telling that story to ourselves over and over again. Rather, to all of those people who feel that way, I will ask you, what are your strengths that have allowed you to survive despite that? And how can we take that survival and allow ourselves to thrive? And you really have to ask yourself that specific question for this reason. There's a phenomenon called repetition compulsion, which was discovered when Freud and a bunch of people were standing around babies, watching babies and how they behaved. And what they said was, this is kind of weird. Like, why are babies throwing their toys out of the car? And so I think a lot of people were like, well, they're just playing. It's like, no, but it's just a counterintuitive behavior. Like, why would the human brain be wired so that you take your own toys and you throw them out? Then they said, that's even weirder that they cry. So how come they're crying? They threw the toy out. Now they're crying. And then they get happy when the mothers bring the toys back. But then they throw the toy out again. Now, some people would say it's just the baby playing. And maybe it is just the baby playing. But one of the theories that this led them to think about was that perhaps, because they noticed the same behavior psychologically in adults, that perhaps we're wired to master disappointment and not to seek fulfillment. That day after day, we try to be really good at the fact that life can suck. We're like, I made it through. Man, I made it through. It's like, well, that's fine. It's great that you have. But I'm going to ask you, what one thing can you do this week that will give you fulfillment? That's not going to be, I overcame this obstacle. It's going to be, I sought fulfillment and I found it. Are you going to give yourself a massage break, maybe a pedicure break, maybe just say, you know what, I understand that we have this agreement, but no, going out with my friends this week, something that gives you fulfillment, because life is short. I have a very simple philosophy, no matter how fancy the science is. You live, you die, you do something in between. And so let's take into account that every day of our lives matters. And the way we spend those days really does matter. And if we can be more mindful about that, I think we will give ourselves a chance to excel and express the ingenuity that is within every human being.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I know your time is very limited. I would like to close the show today. If you could share with the viewers about, I saw your TED Talk, and I was shocked, because a lot of people think that other people are given the advantage. They're born with the silver spoon. They didn't have to work for it. If you could just share briefly about your TED Talk, it just so impressed me.
Thank you. Yeah, no, so I grew up in a very simple environment in South Africa. I went to medical school, and I had so in South Africa, in the final exam, we actually had an examiner from NYU, and so I had done well at the exams, and he looked at me and he said, you should be at Harvard. And I thought, I didn't even know anything about Harvard, and I was actually thinking at the time of studying in England, and I was thinking about Cambridge and gotten some positive responses. And I was in a tiny dorm room in a year in which I was doing some neurochemistry research, and I suddenly thought, I want to study psychiatry, and I want to study psychiatry at Harvard. So I thought, well, how do I do that? I don't know anybody at Harvard. They probably have crazy admission criteria. So I just thought, I'm just going to call. And so I found a way of calling. I called over. The first person who picked up the phone, to the school, and I said, hi, can I speak to the head of Harvard? And they were like, what? Head of Harvard? When you're naive, it doesn't even occur to you. I'm a professor there now. It's a weird, I'm an assistant professor of psychiatry, and it's a hard thing to sort of say. Like, if somebody asked me now, I wouldn't say just call the head, but I think that would be my bad, because I think if you want to call the head, because I called the head. Eventually they said, head of what? I said, head of the medical school. Then they said, well, okay, head of psychiatry. I trained at that hospital eventually. He happened to be walking by the phone. His secretary was away from her desk. He picked up the phone. He told me, I thought you were crazy. I said, hi, I'm just sitting here in South Africa thinking, boy, wouldn't it be great to study at Harvard? And so,
I'm just cracking up.
You and everybody else. And so I said, so he was a very decent guy. And he said, well, why don't you send me your CV and send me what you're interested in. He took it and he circulated it. And the next thing I knew, it was a call saying, would you do a phone interview? I did a phone interview. And I got a FedEx envelope saying, congratulations, welcome to Harvard. And it was a very instrumental decision in my life.
Yeah.
That decision, I think, taught me. Of course, I had to do well. And so my grades were good enough to get into Harvard. But there were probably many other people in the world whose grades were good enough who didn't call.
Absolutely.
And that's the lesson, that if you don't try, you're just never going to know. And so my feeling has been, and actually during that year, I had the most structured, unfocused time that I've ever had. I built in meditation into my day. I built in time away. I built in spending time with my friends. I worked extremely hard and I played extremely hard. And I found a way to build that into my life. And in fact, when I was at Harvard, my first year, I was like, when I was doing my residency, I actually said to people, I really have to work hard. I want to make sure I'm from another country. So I worked harder than anybody. I read more than anybody. And so my first round of feedback, my supervisor said to me, look, you're well ahead of your peers in terms of the amount of knowledge you have, but we're very concerned about you. And I said, how come? I said, you're going to 100% of your classes. Why aren't you showing some discernment? Why are you on the wards with your patients every day? We don't see you sitting on the park bench. We don't see you going for a swim in Walden Pond. He said, we're here to develop a mind and character. If we wanted to just shove information into your head, you could have gone to any other school. The difference here and anywhere else is that we want you to be an educated human being, thoughtful, and we want you to have time away so you can do this. And so I had to reset again. And I keep on having to reset. I do that now. I feel like there's no shame in recognizing that the brain has an automatic way of just wanting to plod on. And if we can just remind ourselves from time to time that mistakes are simply an indication that we're going the wrong way. and that we need to reorient to find our way back on the path that we initially designed.
4 years ago when I first went to Secret Knox, where it has, thought leaders like yourself, coming in from all around the world, 4 years ago, I stayed quiet. I didn't approach any of the speakers, because that's the beauty of Secret Knox, is that, after you speak, you're available. People can actually come up, talk to you. And I didn't do that 4 years ago because I wasn't ready. But when I went back this year, my intention was, I'm going to connect with these thought leaders. And you were one of those. I'm just like, did the selfie and everything else with you. But I also reached out and asked you, would you be on my show? And I told some of my close friends about it. And when you said, if you would ask your parents, I'm going to call Harvard, and, they may have said, what are you doing? Well, because I already reached out to you, Dr. Pillay, and I asked you to be on my show, they're like going, he's not going to be on your show. He's a Harvard psychiatrist. He's a part-time professor. He's never going to be on your show. And I said, I've already asked him. And they go, don't be disappointed. And I said, I'm not going to be disappointed, because if he's supposed to be on my show, he will. And so here we are. You are on my show, and I am so excited, and I know your day is busy. Is there any closing thoughts that you would like to add before we end the show?
I want to thank you for this opportunity. I think the bottom line is that we're all human, and we're here to connect, and we're here to help one another. And that's been my philosophy from day one. I don't care if Harvard calls me to talk. I don't care if a homeless person asks me a question. And so I feel like the fact that you're interested in spreading the word, the fact that you're interested in helping people, and that you're engaging other people to help you, like, why wouldn't anybody want to help anyone like that? Yeah. So if I have the time, then I'll do it. And I happen to have the time, and I'm honored to be on your show. And I think I want to say to everyone that there is a special star waiting to be born in every human being. And if we give ourselves the time and the space to nurture the star, it will come out.
Absolutely. That is just a beautiful way to end the show. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pillay, for being on the show. We will be back next week. And until then, everybody have a wonderful week. Bye-bye.